I'm learning history in Cleveland, Tennessee. Oconee Society, 5 Points Museum.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Curious Curators. I'm Hope.
And I'm Lindsay.
And today we have something exciting for you. You guys know I'm pretty much obsessed with nuclear power plants and
At least I know that.
Yeah, so if you don't know that, spoiler alert, I'm absolutely obsessed with things like this. Some of you might not know this, and I didn't know this. There was a nuclear project right here in Tennessee.
We're talking about Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is just outside of Knoxville.
Yeah, so probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours from here, depending on where you go and where it's actually located, I guess. But this was actually part of the Manhattan Project. They made materials for that. And the Manhattan Project is...
it's basically the development of the atomic bomb during World War II.
And it was only called that because they used to store their uranium in Manhattan, in the Manhattan area of New York City. Oak Ridge isn't even really that old. The town and the area, I guess, were actually established in 1942.
Yeah, I mean, there were some people who kind of lived in that area, but there was no established town. It didn't have a name. I didn't know this. I didn't know it was created specifically for the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
I thought it was, an established city before that.
Yeah, and I thought they just kind of built it there, but apparently they bought 60,000 acres of land, and it was just low cost. There was no population. You could get to it by planes and trains and cars. There was access to water, access to electricity.
They did seize a lot of land under eminent domain, though, and gave people 2 to 6 weeks to get out.
Yeah, so...
Just eviction notices on their house when they went home.
And I think we mentioned this before, but eminent domain just means that, the city can appropriate your property, or the
federal
state,
government,
whatever.
Yeah,
your property can be appropriated for government.
So the federal government went in there and put eviction notices on people's houses and said, you have 2 to 6 weeks to get out.
I would have been so upset. I'm sure they were very upset. But this location is special because there were natural ridges.
Wow.
I know. And that basically, there were 4 plants. So these ridges basically were natural protection. So they couldn't all explode like a little firecracker.
So just one of them.
Yes. And then the ridges would protect the other 3.
Oh, well, there you go.
I know. I thought that was really nice. And I also read that people that lived there suggested names, and Oak Ridge sounded really boring. And
yes, I read that too, that Oak Ridge was so boring nobody would be interested in going there.
So they were like, right, let's call it.
Do you feel bad for the person who suggested that? They suggested Oak Ridge thinking, oh, this is a cool name, and they find out later that they chose that name specifically because it was so boring, nobody would be interested.
Well, and then that poor guy didn't even get credit. I assume it's a guy. It could very well be a woman. But I assume the person didn't get any credit.
Let's talk about the Manhattan Project in general first.
Okay, I took some notes.
Good. So nuclear fission was first discovered in 1939. And concerns were raised that same year that Germany would be able to and other fascist states would be able to harness this power.
Right.
They took it to the president, which was FDR at the time, and pretty much said, this is a problem. We need to do something about this, and kind of told him that we should stockpile uranium ore. And this project was finally greenlit in October of 1941. Under these concerns, too, especially with how the war was going at the time, which wasn't super great for the Allies. And the U.S. had also entered the war that year.
Right.
So then 1942, Oak Ridge was chosen.
Right, and there were other places in the Manhattan Project.
Yes, absolutely.
Outside of Las Vegas is where the bombs themselves were detonated.
And I think that's something almost everybody knows. It's very popular in movies and TV shows to show that, like Indiana Jones and
There's still places
Crystal Skull
in Las Vegas called the Atomic Bar and stuff where they say you can sit on the same place on the rooftop that people would sit, and you can order atomic themed drinks. It was
cash in on anything.
It was very crowded when I was there. I didn't go, but yeah, they were basically practicing to make atomic bombs, and we all know how that turned out, so good job. But Oak Ridge was not the place that they were testing or making the bombs. They were just getting the plutonium and the other ores. We're scientists.
Yes.
But basically, the Manhattan Project would continue until 1947, when it would be replaced by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission.
Well, there you go.
Wow.
The atomic age.
Yes, and now, like, that is not something that we do now. You do not go sit in the desert and watch atomic bombs be detonated or anything else.
Yeah, such a shame. That was such a great pastime.
I watched, like, this horrible show about that, actually, that said that they would have soldiers, American soldiers, stand quite close to see the effects. And, like, that was their orders, was to, like, stand right here. Neither here nor there. There were 4 plants at Oak Ridge, or 4, like, buildings, I guess. So it's a number and a letter, right? So 3 of them, K25, S50, and Y12, were used to separate fissile isotope uranium-235 from natural uranium.
Which is 238.
Yes. And it's like there's very little of this isotope in regular uranium. And then there was one called X10, which was the actual reactor. And that is actually now the Oak Ridge National Lab, where you can actually go on a little tour and stuff. That's that same building. And they had a graphite reactor. And it was, it went from 1942 to 1963. It was decommissioned, meaning it's still there. It's just not in use. So I will say this reactor was constructed by DuPont Chemical. By DuPont, who you might know about. They actually later went on to buy Dow Chemical, who made Agent Orange and napalm. So I'm not really surprised that they were the ones that were making.
So they constructed, like they were the construction crew, or
yeah, they were the ones that made and created this entire reactor.
Okay. Something that really interested me about this whole Oak Ridge thing is that even people who worked there didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, they all just thought they were doing, like, one little bit of something.
Yeah, they weren't told what project they were on.
Do you think they were upset when that was all over?
I don't know, but it actually was revealed what it was doing after the atomic bomb was dropped.
I would have been...
But everybody had their own little special spot. They didn't actually know what they were doing.
I would have been so upset. And it became, like, a big city by the time it was all over. Like, quite a few... Because your whole family would live there. We eventually plan on going to Oak Ridge to see this reactor and everything, because you can go on a tour. But I don't know. I think the whole thing is so strange because it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Like, you think it's not like a super big city, but it's also like not far from Knoxville. So it's not like this was hidden. And like they said, it was accessible by highway, by rail. It wasn't like this was
was
hidden.
Close enough to Knoxville that they had to bus the black high school students to Knoxville for school.
Really?
So Southern Democrats actually forced the facility to be segregated.
Okay.
So they had a black elementary school, but they didn't have a black high school. So the black high school students had to be bused into Knoxville in order to go to a black high school. They did have a white elementary school and a white high school.
Right.
I guess they probably built a black elementary school so that young children were not being bused all the way to Knoxville.
Right, because it's probably at least 45. I would say it's at least 45 minutes from Knoxville. I
haven't made that drive.
I meant to map it. I will say that in 1983, the Department of Energy declassified a report. You know what happens when the Department of Energy declassifies something? It's always bad.
Okay.
Saying that significant amounts of mercury were released into a creek during the years that this was active.
Okay.
Is that not what happened on, like, Aaron Brockovich? They were poisoning the water?
Yes.
Yeah, so there was that.
Was it a creek that people used?
I think they fished in it, at least.
Oh,
which
okay.
is, fish already have mercury, but it can make it almost toxic. I couldn't find a whole lot of information about it, but I did see that they had declassified this report.
Something that I found that was interesting is that there were, it's hard to explain in scientific terms, so I'm going to explain it as simply as I can. There were scientists from Berkeley that were working on this project, and they were apparently trying to they were watching for bugs and other things within the system. So there were these scientists from Berkeley, and then their job was essentially turned over to the Tennessee Eastman Company, and it was just basically high school, like girls with a high school education.
Okay.
Who took over. And the guy who was in charge of them basically said that the young hillbilly girl operators were outperforming the PhDs, who were the scientists who worked on it initially. And they agreed to a production race to see who could do it faster. The hillbilly girls did. And that was because the girls were trained like soldiers, not to reason why they were doing what they were doing, but the scientists could not refrain from time-consuming investigation of the cause of even minor fluctuations. So they kept paying attention to a bunch of little things and trying to find the cause and humming and hawing about what could cause it. And the girls were just like, fix, fix, fix. They were just doing what they were trained to do.
How interesting.
They weren't taking all that extra time to follow the path and investigate.
Well, I think we're probably almost out of time on this, but I did look up one more interesting thing about Oak Ridge.
Oh, great. Tell me more.
Okay, so for a relatively small, I would say like town, city, whatever you really want to call it, there were a lot of like famous people from there, and I was like...
Why did you use quote marks? Are they not famous?
Some of them I'd never heard of.
Oh, okay.
Like a lot of them.
Okay.
Like they were like pro golfers and stuff.
Oh, well,
like,
okay. They would be famous in people who golf.
Right. But I did write down 5, thinking 5 is a great number. Or we could be here all day with me just reading that. So
is it like a good golfing area, I guess, maybe?
I don't
maybe
know.
They have some good golf
courses.
courses.
There were like some NBA players. I did write down one NBA player, but I also like can name 3 off the top of my head. So.
Okay.
Lee Clayton, he's a country singer.
Never heard of him.
Otis Howard, he was in the NBA. William Shepard, an astronaut. Okay. Richard White, the voice of Gaston in the original
You
Beauty and the
clarified
Beast.
that to me earlier. Yes, I
Okay,
know
last
the role.
but not least, my favorite, Megan Fox.
Oh, okay. I know
Yes,
her.
she is actually from Oak Ridge, but apparently moved from there when she was quite young. But
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So small town, quite
Still a poppin' city.
yeah, and she did grow up in East Tennessee afterwards. Just it's
Not in Oak Ridge
yeah, it's interesting when
specifically.
people are born in really small towns to me. But yeah, so I guess that's all I have about Oak Ridge today.
Yeah, I completed my list.
All right, guys, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.
Bye.